Hey folks, welcome into the Bleacher Nation Cubs Podcast. I am Brett Taylor, joined by Michael Cerami. As always, we are sponsored by our wonderful friends at Ankin Law. Howard, Ankin, and crew got to see him this weekend, actually, at our event in Wrigleyville. It was very cool. 3126 million injury law made personal. That's Howard Ankin and his amigos. You're going to hit them up if you have any needs. And we are here to talk Cubs. We're going to touch on a number of things from the week that was. Cubs swept the Sox, woohoo, and then took 2 of 3 from the Marlins, which, hey, look, they're still doing in this stretch of easier series. They are doing at least what they needed to be doing, which is, taking 2 of 3 every series. And at the sort of outcome level, I'm digging that. I was thinking, people were beefing pretty hard. Upset. We'll actually use this maybe to get into one of the topics. So the loss from this week, was Monday against the Marlins. It was a game in which the Cubs came back from an early deficit, took a healthy lead, had a 1-run lead heading into the bottom of the 9th. Daniel Palencia got within a strike of finishing it off, kind of lost that batter, walked the next, and then the triple up the line ends it. Palencia, of course, was in that spot. A number of things. There were dominoes that toppled throughout the season to put him there, including Ryan Presley's ineffectiveness. He pitched a setup inning in that game. And Porter Hodge, then we learned, was unavailable due to an oblique injury that would subsequently send him to the injured list. And Palencia got that first crack at a sort of traditional save in the absence of those two guys. And what I would note to leave the game is, for one thing, lots of little things happened throughout that game where a run could have gone in one direction or the other. That's usually the case in 1-run games. So I don't want to get too hung up on pinning the loss on Daniel Palencia. And then the second thing is in the win Wednesday, in which Palencia, also a 1-run game, also set up for a traditional save. He got that look again. That was another game where a whole lot could have gone in one little direction or the other. To make it not a 1-run game, to make it not even an opportunity for him to do the save. And so it isn't the Cubs blew Monday's game and then just cruised in Wednesday's game. It's no, they were both kind of coin flips and they got one of them and didn't get the other. So open to you comments at the bigger level. And then,
what's funny is I actually thought Palencia looked better in the loss.
He did. At
Monday
least for the first 3 batters.
Yeah. Right. He was more impressive then. But also, and I think what stung the most about that, well, there's 2 things. One, at a team level, when you have a win just right on a platter, it hurts so much more to lose that game than if on Wednesday, the Marlins were the team to get that second run before the Cubs, and then they just petered out and be oh, well, the offense didn't. That would have been a more tenable set of results. So that's why it hurt one in one capacity. The second is that I think everyone it all kind of gets washed away now that Palencia came back in and got the save yesterday. But man, he had worked his way up to that spot. And I think he had actually earned it. There was there is obviously there's injuries and the Cubs bullpen struggling anyway. So it's maybe Palencia shouldn't be in that spot, but he had pitched well. He had looked good. He is averaging. I should look it up before I say this as though it's a fact. It seems as though he's averaging 100.5 miles per hour on his fastball. He looks crazy good. The weird thing is I feel like people are following him off frequently, even at 101. And he's not just blowing it past them entirely, which maybe there's something to say about deception or extension or whatever.
Or location.
It seems as though he should be missing more bats, but I still really like what I see. If he didn't have to be the closer, which he shouldn't have to be, it's I'm very excited about Daniel Palencia right now. Right. And so I felt bad for him when that happened on Monday. And that's kind of what sucked the most. But I don't know what the Cubs are going to do.
Well,
how do you feel back into the bullpen? I don't even want to talk back into the bullpen.
I know. So
it's just the same conversation.
I'm not going to linger
3 years.
Yeah. we're not going to linger on. I mean, we've probably hit on it several podcasts that decisions were made in the offseason that have set this up. Fine, whatever. This is the world the Cubs live in now. And I'm with you. I'm really digging how Palencia looks overall this year. There's just a lot more steadiness to his performance that I particularly like, because he's a guy who got a couple years worth of up, down looks and sort of is getting his feet under him. And this is what you would really want the trajectory to look like for a young relief prospect kind of emerging like him. So I dig that. I don't love.
Let me jump in.
I agree.
Go on. Where you finish that thought?
I was just say I don't love that he's had the closing job foisted upon him at this time.
Oh, sure.
And I think that I would note Brad Keller is probably the best reliever the Cubs have right now. Yeah. But my instinct was, and I think it's been borne out, is that Craig Counsell prefers to have him available for situational stuff, multi-inning, different parts of the lineup. It's almost like Keller's burdened by his own ability and success, but I think that's the right way to use him.
No, I think that's true. I think that is also true with Caleb Thielbar. I think Counsell, I don't think he would be the closer or is as good as Keller, but I do think Counsell likes to use him in a certain way in certain innings and situations. But I did want to talk about Palencia because I think it's a good opportunity for you to describe something that you often describe, and you're unlocking this thought right now. The difference between command and control, because it feels like to me, Palencia for the first time in his career has control and maybe not command. So why don't you do that little spiel? Because I think that's an important thing to understand that we don't talk about a lot. People use those words interchangeably when they are not. And Palencia is a pretty good example of that.
Yeah. And Cade Horton so far has been a good example of that too. A very good example of that. And there was someone else in the past week who had an outing that was, oh boy, that's going to drive me crazy, but I'm on the spot. We record this live, so I can't come up with it. No, but the gist is, sometimes we use those words interchangeably, depending on the point you're making, but you can put a finer point on it in terms of looking at with control. It's not just about not issuing walks, but it is the ability to throw all of your pitches for strikes when needed. That's kind of the real shorthand for control. And not everybody has that, especially outing to outing. And we see that a lot of times with high octane relievers with nasty stuff, where they don't necessarily have great control, by which we simply mean there's an inability there to consistently throw strikes with all their pitches. Command sort of is a next tier where you're talking about executing to roughly, I think we get our expectations get a little too high on guys for how well they can do this, but where you're executing pitches to a particular location. And particularly when we talk about command, it's usually in the strike zone. And we're talking about executing the four-seamer up. We're talking about the change-up down and away. We're talking about being able to play with eye level, being able to tunnel pitches together. All of these things are related to command. And it's a complex kinetic chain of the body that allows a guy to have sufficient command to get pitches that otherwise look really nasty. Who was a great example of this was Tyler Chatwood. Chatwood.
I wish I could show you my screen. I have Tyler Chatwood pulled up. Oh man, that's so funny. I was like, I'm gonna bring that up. Perfect example.
So as Cubs fans may remember,
way too excited about that.
Just no, I liked it. So unbelievably nasty stuff. Multiple Cubs hitters at the time, when they would hit off him in spring training, they would say, this is the nastiest stuff I've seen this year or whatever. And we know early on, Chatwood struggled badly with control. Like there was a period of time where he was walking dudes at like a 20% clip or just something that was like outrageously high for a starting pitcher. And eventually he was able to rein in that control. Some of it was mechanical. Some of it was shaving off pitches. Some of it was just improvements in those pitches, and the control improved pretty dramatically. But what we noticed is he still wasn't then missing bats at a clip that you would expect for a guy who has this unbelievably nasty stuff. And a lot of it was because he'd have these outings where he was controlling his pitches, but he was they're right there in the center of the zone. And
I was going to go into this entire monologue. I'm like happy and annoyed because I had this I was like Tyler Chatwood, 2019. Like,
and I don't have the data to back this one up, but what I anecdotally look for, and this is something I
it's
have
a podcast
seen a lot
in
with
2025.
Horton.
You don't need data.
I know you can just say
stuff.
Is a hallmark is a guy who is known to have nasty stuff, good velo, good movement, but whose pitches are disproportionately center cut and who generates a lot of foul balls because his stuff and his velo are nasty enough to avoid barrels where guys can't quite get on it, but you're not going to miss bats in the center of the zone like that. Unless now I'm going to get people saying, but I see guys whiff at pitches in the center of the zone all the time. Yeah, and some of that's just because it happens, but some of it's also because command is interrelated with your other pitches. And so I think that it isn't as simple as saying he's not locating this one pitch. It's the way they work together. So
exactly.
There's your command and control.
And I think, I think that Palencia is a good example of that. I mean, look, it's not a huge sample last year, but even over the last years, he walked 12% of the batters and 17.5% of the batters he faced. This year he's down to 10.8%. It's better. So I think his control is better. When I see him pitch, I'm confident in his ability to throw a strike. It's just that when he's throwing 101 and they're fouling it off over and over, it's like something about how he's commanding that pitch in relation to his other pitches is not correct yet. It's not all the way there, but that's still a step forward. And he's still a guy who could soon become an important high leverage arm for the Cubs. And I'm pretty excited about that, or already is, I guess.
Well, and he showed it in these two outings, right? That you got one outing in the save where he's just in the zone, 3 batted balls, a couple of them well struck, but he gets outs, right? Because most batted balls turn into outs. That's a little sneaky reality of baseball. Whereas the one he blew, sandwiched in, we paid attention to the 0-2 hanging slider and then the walk-off triple, but mixed in the middle was a non-competitive 4-pitch walk where he lost his control for a batter. And the Cubs and Palencia lost that game because of it. And so you'd always rather, for a pitcher like him, if it's like, okay, fine, at least get the control.
That's the first step.
And then we can talk about changing grips, maybe working on spin to kind of amplify where that four-seamer is located. I suspect that's probably need to look at that because I bet that's an issue too, that he's probably not maximizing his spin efficiency.
You know what pisses me off, and it's in a way of being a baseball fan, is like when someone starts having they have a good stretch or a good game or whatever. And I can't remember who this was this year. You might remember faster. It might have been Matthew Boyd. It might have been Jamison Tyone, but they'll have like a terrible 3 starts in a row, and then they'll have a dominant outing. Be like, well, I moved 3 inches over to the first base side of the rubber. And you're like, that's what it is. Like, and a lot of times it like kind of is something like that, but it's just like, what? Like, this is how fine of a difference we are between a guy being excellent. And I know it's figuring out what that answer is and being able to, actually make the change in a game. Okay, fine. All that's great. But it's just like, or like Matt Shaw, like lifting his front legs 6 inches off the ground instead of 12 inches off the ground. It's like, that's the difference between you with a 60 weighted runs created plus and a 100. Like, and no, but in ways, yes. And again, the one where they say that they moved over on the rubber, I'm like, Jesus, like that's it. You could have just accidentally stood 3 inches over. Like, I don't know. That just, I do you remember who someone you just wrote about it? It was one of the
Colin Ray. Yeah, it was Colin Ray.
Yeah,
moved over.
It was Colin Ray. I mean, there you go.
It was funny because as I was writing that up, I was sort of internally rejecting a little bit. I know that it does matter. It was part of it, but I'm like looking at his pitches, looking at his mix. I'm like, no, there's a lot that's changed. But it's funny.
95.
Like that helps a little bit. No, I mean, we know this is a game of inches. We know that the competitiveness level of these athletes is so high that like those little differences can make, those little changes can make a difference. But I also think a huge part of it is just the nature of being a human, which is that we hate things that are out of our control. We hate uncertainty. And so we will desperately seek for explanations just because it makes us feel a little bit more in control of our world. And baseball is actually a wonderful sport as an example of that, because so much of baseball is randomness and has nothing to do with skill or ability. It's just the physics of the world. And we work so hard as writers and as fans to try to come up with explanations for that stuff. And I don't know, sometimes we're probably doing ourselves and our readers a disservice by not just being like, hey, just so you know, the world is chaotic and uncertain, and we're not always going to be able to wrap our arms around, what happened. So let's talk about why Matt Shaw is so much better now that he's come up from his month-long stint at Iowa.
Is better now.
It's proven.
No, listen.
Yeah, so let's talk about Shaw.
Yeah, I had a tweet the other day. Does he only hit the ball to right field now? I feel like every time he's up, he's done it. I have to look, but it's been a lot of right field.
Can I talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
So I just want to note, we talk a lot about power, generation of power. Typically, a guy of his size, and bat speed and strength is going to have most of his in-game power to the pull side, because you can just sort of naturally hit the ball further when you're out in front, and that's to the pull side. And so that's, I wouldn't say, we didn't hear anything about the Cubs working with him on more pull or him working on more pull or anything like that. But it would be a natural thing as he came up through the system, developed physically, and sort of maxed out his body, that it'd be like, by the way, your home runs are going to come to the pull side. And I still think that's probably true for him. But when he was coming up through the system, and it's super easy to see why, because he's got this weird closed off stance, that so much of his best power is going to go oppo. And so I wonder if it's just small sample. We just happen to see he has made some of his best authoritative contact since he's been back up. And so therefore it happens to be opposite field. Or is that just where his best power generation is right now? And then he will grow and develop as a hitter. I remember when Javi Baez, of all hitters, he had so much power at the opposite field, and he could hit a lot of home runs that way. Yeah. But even that was a discussion of like, yes, but if you could pull a little bit more, you'd hit for even more power. And sometimes you just take guys as they are, and you work at the margins.
Now, I like changing who they are at their own, to their own detriment and to the detriment of the team. No, I know. I mean, listen, I was laughing. I think it was on the broadcast, or it might've been like on Marquee, like before the game. They were talking about like the differences in the way Matt Shaw looked before and after, or it was even maybe in an article. And it was like, that's a subtle change. I mean, it's not like he's not doing the leg kick. He is. And I think the bigger thing, probably, frankly, I think the leg kick is the visual thing. And I think that it is slightly subdued, and maybe that's all it needed to be. Or maybe that's all the Cubs are trying to push him to change in season. That's also reasonable. I think that thing he talked about, though, about starting his swing earlier, in anticipation of higher velocities in the big leagues, he changed that over the offseason, apparently. I think that, combined with the mechanics, the physics of lifting your leg as part of your swing. If you're starting early and that start includes being off balance for longer, that's more likely to cause the issue than the leg kick itself. So like the leg kick, if you got rid of it, sure, you can load sooner or whatever. But if you're going to lift your leg up high and you're going to start that even earlier because you're thinking the velocity is going to be higher, that to me was the bigger issue that he had to face. And so maybe you chip away a little bit at the leg kick, make it a little smaller, you're balanced a little bit longer, and you chip away a little bit at starting your sequencing earlier. And the combined efforts of that are what will turn into, better swing decisions, first of all, because there were some poor swing decisions earlier in the year. And when you make better swing decisions, you're more likely to be swinging at strikes, which you're more likely to do damage on, which will lead to more hard contact. Like that is the series of events that I'm hoping he learned at AAA Iowa. And again, I mean, I think I was like maybe the most pessimistic because at first the results were coming, and you go and look at, they have exit velocity at Iowa now. It's like 82 mile an hour single, 80, or you watch the highlights and they're like grounders that a big league defense are going to stop. It started getting better. and it looks better already. And, I made a funny post in our Discord and on Twitter. It was like, they sent him down with a 62 rated runs created plus, and he's already up to 89 3 games later. That's just a good example of how early in his big league season he is, that 3 games can like completely change his numbers. So let's give him a second. I also just think he looks super athletic. He looks like he's going to be able to handle third. He made some tough plays. He had 2 bad throws this series. But one of them, he was like trying to be a hero on. It was like a spin play. And it was like, it was fine. Just whip it when you can. The other one was, it brought Bush up the line and into the batter. And I think they still got the out, but it was like, don't do that. It was like, remember Chris Bryant had that problem for the first like month. Either way, It's not like the Cubs have had any offensive production at third base. And except for when Nicky Lopez started, any defensive third stability at the position. So Matt Shaw should be an immediate upgrade to the floor, almost certainly, and to the ceiling, absolutely.
A couple just responses to that, or not responses, amplifications, because I think you nailed all of that. One is we should add, in this stint in the big leagues, Shaw is facing Marlins pitching, and in his previous one, he was facing just a battery of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. And that undoubtedly is a factor, both in you're just less likely to succeed against great pitchers, but then also it can affect the way you're operating. And I think that probably was a part of the Cubs' decision when they said they didn't want him in survival mode at the plate for too long, because then you get out of what makes you good. And so that was my favorite part of him coming back for this Marlins series and having success in the way he did, is it felt very attack oriented. And you want that from him. And I should add, I forgot, by the way, huge props to him for the 11 pitch at bat against Ryan Weathers.
Yeah, that was great.
So easy to forget and ignore, because the Cubs ended up winning by 13 runs. Weathers was cruising, was likely to go another inning. Game was still tied at 1. And Shaw has this tremendous battle with him. 11 pitches, grinds him down, ultimately grounds out to second base. But that ended Weathers' day. And then Marlins bullpen comes in the next inning. Boom, Cubs put up an 8 spot and the game's over. So huge credit to him. I feel like that's a big confidence booster too, because Weathers is as quite good. And so I liked that. And then the last thing is just on the throws. It's a really common issue we see for young or converted players at third base. For the throws to be up the line, because you're a righty, so your natural tail on the throw is to the arm side. So that's part of it. And your window to complete that throw to the first baseman is a much narrower view. Like picture yourself at third base looking at first. It's narrower to avoid the runner than a shortstop or a second baseman. And so, which isn't to say we're like harder on third baseman for that particular issue, but it's a big part of, or I guess maybe it is. I want fans going forward to make sure they aren't too hard on Matt Shaw if you see that particular type of mistake a lot. It's like, yeah, that's the one he's most likely to make, is a tailing throw that goes up the line and takes the first baseman and the runner. But your conclusion is right. Don't do that. I don't want to see Michael Busch have a broken wrist. Okay, so let's hit on just one more young player while we're on it. Because we saw Cade Horton's first start in this past week against the White Sox, and then his second start against the Marlins. I don't have a ton to say, actually, that hasn't already been said, other than I like that we're getting to see him develop. Some guys come up from the minor leagues and they are who they are. And yeah, we talk about improvement over the course of, their 20s. But they typically don't come up as clearly unfinished products that have tons of potential, and you can see them making changes and improving through that first year, like in the same way that you would if you were following them at AA or AAA. Whereas I feel like that's what we're getting with Cade Horton. I feel like we were watching a guy who is just still in development mode and who happens to be able to succeed against big league hitters, even as he is developing.
Yeah. He also has Justin Steele's sweat glands. Just immediately starts pouring, dripping. And Justin Steele always did too. I was like, man, you cut that hair or something. You're looking juicy. So I a couple of things. And I think it's like so perfectly, like, I think this is all kind of melds together into one conversation in my mind. So first of all, when Cade Horton has been pitching, I've been kind of like, I'm happy to see, even though this may be superficial for a lot of the reasons we discussed earlier on this pod, but with him throwing 95, 96 plus miles per hour with his fastball when he can, it's awesome. Ben Brown throws 96, 97. Colin Ray's at 95 or above. All of a sudden, because Justin Steele and Shota Imanaga, not coincidentally, are the best two Cubs pitchers are out, the Cubs have more velocity in their rotation than pretty much ever in the last 10 years. I mean, they never had guys that throw 90. They just don't. That's not their type of pitcher. And Kyle Hendricks has taken up.
Matthew Boyd is throwing harder than he ever has in his career.
Yeah.
Too.
It's so that's interesting. Then the other thing is that obviously when you talk about Ben Brown, and I'm going to circle this to Cade Horton is the point here. Ben Brown is, his big issue right now, as we've discussed, is the lack of a quality third pitch. His limits his ability by way of how you described really nicely that even if either one of those two pitches is devastating, a batter can sit on one of them in a particular spot and whiff 2 times and then make contact on the third and know exactly what they're going to do with it. They're going to do a lot of damage, right? So Cade Horton starts yesterday, and I think I texted you like in the second inning, and I was like, dude, his changeup is looking awesome today, which is famously not his best pitch. His slider is what got him drafted. His fastball is what makes him a top prospect in addition to his plus, sweeper slider. The changeup is one he's been developing, and it's also such an important pitch for righties against lefty batters. And yesterday, it was awesome. I mean, I'm not like a pitch guru like a lot of people out there, and I could tell immediately how good it looked. And then sure enough, it generated the most whiffs of any pitch that he had. He generated a ton of whiffs overall. It was working against some of their best left-handed hitters. And then after the game, he talked about how he had a good feel for it and about yada, yada, yada. And so when I saw that, it's important for a couple of reasons. One, it's important to have a third pitch for 2 reasons. One, you need it for certain types of hitters, as we saw yesterday. It helps against lefties. It's a whole thing Jameson Taillon is still searching for in his career, this late in his career, right? But so he has that. But also, as Cade Horton sort of alluded to, is that maybe you don't have your best feel for your sweeper one day or your fastball one day. You could lean on a third quality pitch. And that's something that, again, eliciting memories for Cubs fans listening, like John Lester would do a lot, or Yu Darvish would do a lot because he had such a wide repertoire. Whatever pitch is working that day, you can then lean on and still have your fastball to bounce back on or whatever it is. So to see him develop that changeup, the Marlins aren't the greatest team in baseball, but they're not terrible. There's worse offenses out there. And it just was so heartening because we already know the fastball and slider are going to play. The question is when or if he was going to be able to develop a third pitch. And for at least one day, it looked like a plus, if not plus changeup. I mean, that was incredible. So I thought that was very encouraging.
Yeah. When you talk about a changeup falling off the table, that's what it looked like. And the only thing I would add is he does also have a curveball. But it was funny in his development. If you were following him as a prospect, it was sort of like which one of those two is going to emerge as his third pitch. And that isn't to say like we're there, because he may still be developing feel for that changeup. And he still is occasionally throwing the curveball, I believe. Because it's a true separate pitch from his slider. Some guys, it's a slurvy mix, but it's truly a distinct pitch. But my guess is, if he has another outing or two where the feel for the changeup is there, the Cubs are probably going to be like, you know what? That's enough for right now. Let's just really get our hands around. Yeah, let's really get our hands around these 3 pitches. And then a final thought on Ben Brown as it relates to the 2-pitch thing. I've written about it a good bit, so you can go to Bleacher Nation and find it. But often people will remark that Justin Steele is the exception, it has so much success. And there's 2 things I want to say about that just because it frames the Ben Brown stuff. Don't forget. 1, Justin Steele doesn't actually just throw 2 pitches. He does work in some other pitches. He's got a sinker. He's got a very occasional change, very occasional curveball. But in concert, it's enough that his 2-pitch mix is only like 85% of it, which again, that's very heavy. Don't get me wrong. That's a very heavy 2-pitch for most starters, but it's, it's more than just like one throwaway pitch during a start. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then 2, he is the guy I'm talking about when I say he has unbelievable command. His ability to execute the fastball and the slider where he wants to against different batters is just, it's as good. I don't know. It's as good as I can remember seeing since probably John Lester in terms of a Cubs
or
left-handed
Hendricks
starter.
With this, when he had his changeup and he put it to either side,
Yes. Hey, talk about a guy who had success with 2 pitches a lot of the time. It was just his sinker and his changeup. Now he could cut his changeup, which really kind of
that's what I mean. He did his changeup 2 different ways, but
right. Okay. I'm good on that stuff. I'm ready for the game if you are.
Okay. So today's game of the week is brought to you by Feldco, the home renewal expert. Bleacher Nation is proud to partner with Feldco. For almost 50 years, Feldco has been transforming Chicagoland homes with their windows, sliding doors, and roofing. Feldco is family owned and prides themselves on delighting their customers. With products made in the U.S. and designed specifically for the Midwest, Feldco offers the perfect balance of beauty and energy efficiency. Thank you, Feldco, for sponsoring this segment of the podcast. Hit me, baby.
All right. And today's game is a good old-fashioned would you rather. I think most folks are familiar. I was tracking a conversation this past week that was kind of breaking out amongst White Sox fans. Of course, Cubs White Sox played this past week. Cubs swept the White Sox, they're not as hapless as the Rockies this year, but they are looking to be perhaps another, ineffective team. And a lot of the discussion was about some White Sox fans, and maybe some Cubs fans too, being surprised to learn that many of their compatriots were rooting for the Cubs in the World Series in 2016. And that got me wondering, what would, if the shoe were on the other foot in sort of other scenarios, how would we feel? How would we root? And so I'm putting you on the spot with a number of these would you rather. Okay. So let's start pretty easy. Okay. Imagine the Cubs and White Sox are both steaming through the playoffs in a given year. Would you rather the White Sox lost in the ALCS just before getting to the World Series where the Cubs are waiting? Or would you rather the White Sox did win and go and we get a crosstown World Series?
Wow. See, that's actually a pretty hard one. I got to say, you know what? No, this is not hard. I would love to see the Cubs and the White Sox in the World Series because I think this town would be so fun. Chicago would be a blast. Now, the rub there is the balance between bliss and misery forever relies on 7 games or fewer, because if the White Sox won that series, it'd be, the end. We would never hear the end of it ever. But how could you resist the juice of Chicago having 2 teams in the World Series? That would be awesome. Everyone would be talking about baseball. I'd be for it. I'm taking Cubs Sox World Series.
I guess I shouldn't have said that was an easy one to start with. I meant suppose more that it's very clear what the problems are with each choice. So maybe make this one a little simpler. I'm curious. Same question. Cubs are not in it. Okay. Cubs are out of it. It's just the White Sox are in the ALCS. Are you rooting for the White Sox to make it to the World Series just so that you as a Chicago baseball fan get to see them? Or would that annoy you too much and you don't want them in there?
Okay. See here, this is going to help people understand. Cause I think the root of this was that I even said, I root for the White Sox to beat the Cardinals in the World Series 1,000 times out of 1,000. But I'd also prefer that they
You took the next one.
Well,
that's good.
I wouldn't want them to win. I'd rather they not make it to the World Series. Yeah, correct. There's just a handful of teams that I would prefer they beat. Well, I'm going to stick there.
Yes.
I don't want.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah. Okay, so you already answered if it was Cardinals, White Sox, you would rather the White Sox win the World Series.
I think I genuinely think it's insane for any Cubs fan. Can I actually I'll give you a list of teams, or is that where this is going?
You're jumping ahead, but that is where it was going to land. It was essentially,
go.
What are are there any teams that you would, other than the Cubs, that you would definitely root for over the White Sox in the World Series? Because I'm assuming now, based on what you've said, that most teams you'd be like, yeah, I'm pulling for the White Sox.
I mean, let me sort of work backwards to get there, because I need to decide in my head as I go. You know that Michael Scott quote where he goes, "I just start talking sometimes and I don't know where the end of the sentence is." That's where I am right now. So like, if the White Sox are facing the Cardinals in the World Series, they're facing the Brewers in the World Series, if they're facing the Dodgers, the Mets, probably even the Reds, I'm 100% rooting for the White Sox. I'm sorry if that offends people. I think you're crazy if you want one of your divisional rivals who you play all the time, who hang things over your head just as frequently, if not more, in at least online, to win instead of the White Sox. You're crazy. And then that kind of that extends to the Dodgers and the Mets, who, for reasons of finances, for reasons of recent history against both of those teams, and in the Mets case, past Cubs Mets, rivalry. I just don't want them to win. But I would say the Braves, you've won enough. I'm not rooting for the Braves to win again. But like, you're telling me if the Pirates got to the World Series, it's like, yeah, maybe I want to see the Pirates win. And that's an NL Central team. Maybe that's our producer Addison is a Pirates fan, so he hit the chat up with a million exclamation points and a yeah. But I think I'd have to go through it. But like, for the most part, I'm probably defaulting to White Sox over an NL team in the World Series in a matchup, but definitely no question for the Cardinals, the Brewers, the Dodgers, the Mets, the Braves. Like 100%, I'm rooting for the White Sox over those teams to win. But like you said earlier, I love that you gave me this out. If I have the choice of the White Sox not making the World Series, then that's even better.
I feel like that's your saving right there. So no one can be like, ooh, look who secretly loves the White Sox. Okay, couple hard ones to end it. Would you rather the Cubs win the next World Series? Okay, so they're winning this year. Yeah, baby. But then the White Sox win the next 5 World Series. Or would you rather the Cubs entirely miss the playoffs for the next 4 years, but then beat the White Sox in the World Series in year 5? So you got to wait 5 years for it. And the Cubs are not in competition until then, but you get Cubs over the White Sox. Okay, so you got those two choices. One is Cubs win it this year, but White Sox get the next 5. Or Cubs miss the playoffs for 5 years and then beat the Sox in the one after that.
No, it's got to be that one, because there's already a chance the Cubs only make the playoffs in 3 of those years, right? The next 5. So, and like I said earlier, the scrumptiousness, the juiciness, the deliciousness of the Cubs beating the White Sox in the World Series, having more World Series rings, like all of that, like, I can taste it. So I will take that. And hey, I'm a Cubs fan. They don't make the playoffs most years. Like, let's be honest. It was like 3 years, 10 years ago.
And it would be pretty painful to watch the White Sox win 5 straight.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's brutal. Even if it was 3, I might have still, that's just, you're giving them an all-time baseball dynasty.
Right. All right.
So no.
Last one. Taking the White Sox out of it for this last one. Just, this is the kind of one that I always like to think about. Would you rather this year's Cubs win 100 games but miss the playoffs, or win 83 games and then lose in the wild card round?
That's so terrible.
So they only win 83, but they make the playoffs, or they win 100 in the regular season but don't make the playoffs.
Actually, no. This isn't hard. The answer is 100 games and miss the playoffs, because this team, with one big exception and a couple smaller exceptions, is young and under control in mostly in 2026. Obviously, Kyle Tucker's not yet, right? But so that would necessarily mean that they played well and most likely got performances from guys that are going to be around next year when 100 wins will most likely get you back in. But yeah, if they won 83 games again, that's going to be. I hope they either win. I hope they win at 83. If they're not going to do well, I hope they win exactly 83 again.
Right.
Just
it's the Bulls picking at
justice.
9 or whatever.
Yeah.
So where would I have had to move them in the playoffs for you to take 83 wins?
I'm
how far
glad
up
you said that.
The ladder?
Because if you said 83 and World Series, obviously 83 and NLCS, I still say yes. 83 and they, I think you got to take that. Because you would forget about the regular season if they were in the NLCS.
Right, you'd be like, oh, remember the NLCS? Like,
we'd be like they underperformed throughout the year because of injuries, but now this is the real them performing when it matters. We would make up a lie, because art is a lie and nothing is real. NLDS though, it's like, so you're telling me I get a wild card win or two and like then they flame out. I don't think that's worth it. I really don't. NLCS feels like an accomplishment in and of its own right. The NLDS is like where the Cubs need to be every year anyway. So give me 100 wins up to that point. That was fun.
I think I'm with you.
Those ones are harder.
I like that. I love doing those. I just do them up here sometimes, but okay. Well, that's it. That's it for the game. And that's it for the Bleacher Nation Cubs. I know I said that 3 times. Bleacher Nation Cubs podcast. I'm Brett Taylor. That's Michael Strami. You can read our work as always at bleachernation.com. You can visit our friends at Ankin Law. They have sponsored this show. Thank you kindly. 3126 million. Injury law made personal. Ankin Law. And we'll be back at you next week. In the interim, go Cubs and make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing, and telling your friends. Love y'all. Goodbye.